We all know the town, aka Tristram theme. It's been covered extensively by many creators on here. Today I want to shine some light on the other, less popular pieces too, since they all aid in creating the uniquely thrilling atmosphere of Blizzard's action RPG classic. If you're a fan of in-depth video game soundtrack reviews, make sure to subscribe to my channel and check out the other videos in the series. Diablo 1 released in 1997, marking the start of possibly the biggest franchise in the genre. Praised by fans and critics alike, the first Diablo game is a true video game classic that often gets rather little mention compared to its sequels. Today, we'll change that by taking a closer look at the soundtrack of this magnificent game and ask the simple question: is the music good? Diablo contains 8 tracks in total, including the 2 pieces from the not-so-popular Hellfire DLC, and they follow the places of the game chronologically. If you're not familiar with the first Diablo game, you start the journey in a little town populated by a handful of endearing citizens.
And a fellow drinking peace?
Quickly you learn that your overarching purpose in this world is to descend into the depths of the local cathedral and destroy the evil forces awaiting you there. Not the most intricate of narratives, but certainly enough to pull you in its small, yet wonderfully immersive world. I was sincerely baffled at how much this game was able to grab my attention. I expected a decent, but somewhat shallow experience playing this game for the very first time in 2023. What I got was quite the adventure. I'm actually working on a separate video about this, since I find this game surprisingly interesting even without the soundtrack. If that sounds entertaining to you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. The Diablo 1 soundtrack was composed by Matt Ullman, who also worked on Diablo 2, StarCraft 1, World of Warcraft's The Burning Crusade expansion, as well as the Torchlight games over at the Runic Games studio. That's a very respectable resume. The individual tracks become audible once you enter their respective zones, so you'll be listening to these for quite a while at a time, meaning they run the risk of committing the worst sin a piece of music can possibly commit: become boring. Before we dive into the music, I want to preface with my usual disclaimer. There are no objective parameters for measuring the quality of music. They simply don't exist. Hence, I will not be talking about what is good or bad, but rather what I believe works or doesn't, aka what I enjoy or what I don't. It's just my opinion, so don't take it too seriously. Let's begin. The Diablo theme starts off with a great amount of tension right from the start, and only increases it over its runtime. The snare drum roll creates a feeling of anticipation. It gives me the image of the army of the dead slowly marching from the depths of hell all the way to the mortal plane, their only purpose to kill and destroy. This track contains a brief melody that reappears in some of the following tracks. I like recurring elements like these, as they create continuity through the music itself, while also adding familiarity to some of the other tracks. The Diablo theme increases its tempo near the end, until finally exploding into a big major chords, played by an organ, for that extra dose of sacrilegious irony. Finishing this scary piece off with a major chord is not untypical, especially for organ pieces from the Baroque era, but I do have to question whether this wouldn't have benefited from a different ending sound. You could interpret different meanings into this, and the low piano notes fading out afterwards do retain the spooky atmosphere of the piece, so it might be perfect just the way it is. Who knows? Regardless of my disdain towards the Picardy Third, the ending is intense and does a nice job of sending you off on this most thrilling of adventures. A great start to this OST. The Tristram theme has already been torn apart by many others, so I will just mention how this piece impacted me as a player and a listener. While generally calm, the opening of the piece has a strong sense of mystery. You drop straight into this place with no prior warning or any information to guide you, so it fits perfectly. The first longer section is surprisingly tense in a very discreet way. The This tension is composed of various small details, like the heavy delay effect on the guitar, the harmonic development, as well as the reappearance of that melody from the previous theme. The Tristram theme also has more innocent sections that are more in line with what I'd expect to hear from the only place in this game where you can feel truly safe. This part is very similar to the opening of the Tristram theme, however it goes on for longer, mostly with the guitar in the foreground, creating a notion of safety. This is the place where you can rest and recover between cathedral visits, after all. Following this section is, ironically, yet another, let's say more anxious part. With the fast guitar strumming, the descending harmonic minor scale and other little details building the frightening vibe. This section invokes a feeling of paranoia in me, making me question whether I'm actually safe in this small settlement, or whether I should always keep an eye open for any of the numerous detestable creatures I had encountered in the vast dungeons of the cathedral. It also stresses me to go back to the dungeons and slaughter my way to the Dark Lord himself, before it's too late. It's truly remarkable how this piece of music can instill such a variety of emotions in me while pretty much nailing the atmosphere for every single one of them. The instrumentation is also quite diverse and feels completely intentional. Every one of these instruments and sounds has been integrated thoughtfully into this composition. And aside all of that, it's simply beautiful to listen to, which is probably the most important component. I can fully understand the hype around this piece, which I honestly didn't expect. This is a brilliant composition. The dungeon theme is probably even more impactful than the town theme for me. Booting up the game and landing in Tristram is iconic and immersive, sure, but stepping foot into the cathedral and its seemingly never-ending dungeon for the very first time is simply incomparable. Staring at the darkness and wondering whether coming here was an even remotely sensible decision, you hear the choir singing slowly fading in, accompanied by the increasingly aggressive drumming, and suddenly the realization grabs hold of you. You're going to die here. The track offers a steady groove from the orchestral drumming, while the screeching noises above it add the necessary eeriness to portray this abysmal place acoustically. This piece gives me the feeling of regret. I know there is nowhere else to go than down, deeper and deeper. But every time I open a door to a new room full of despicable monstrosities, every time I descend one layer lower than the previous one, this theme is warning me that what I just did was a terrible mistake. Fantastic. As you travel further into the depths of this maddening abyss, the sounds around you adapt. The Catacombs theme starts off very similarly to the dungeon theme. A steady rhythm from the drums, this time paired with a rock guitar riff in the background, bringing a new flavor into the mix. This section of the Catacombs sounds a bit more determined, like as if you delved so deep that you're slowly beginning to realize that the only way forward is down. This familiar soundscape is interrupted by a complete 180 turn. All of the sounds are suddenly very reminiscent of the Tristram soundtrack, while at some points some sort of laughter or bickering can be heard in the back. This has a variety of potential meanings, but to me this feels like remembering the calm from the town you just left in pursuit of this quest, or maybe daydreaming about a place, wishing you had never embarked on this mission. The laughing sounds like the demons and skeletons of the Catacombs are mocking you from the shadows as you slowly start to lose your mind in the all-encompassing darkness. The third section enhances this image even further as the musical energy changes drastically one more time. The faster groove, paired with the altered instrumentation, create a vibe of feeling lost in the maze of the Catacombs, every path representing more questions than it reveals answers. Overall, a very diverse track, even more so than the previous ones. I really enjoyed the variety of Diablo's OST so far. It manages to provide so many different emotional states in such a short amount of pieces. I did not expect that at all. Very impressive. The quiet drumming at the start of the Caves theme is very reminiscent of a certain indie horror title whose soundtrack I've covered recently. Any Fear and Hunger fans watching right now? If you're not familiar with it, it certainly has some similar vibes I get from Diablo, however much more gruesome and unforgiving to the player. You might want to check that one out after finishing this video. Anyway, the Caves theme has the motif from the first two tracks appear once again, creating even more continuity for the soundtrack. The heavily distorted or fuzzed guitar creates an uneasy feeling, slowly pushing me towards the brink of insanity. The second section spirals into a plane of sound that is very meditative, but also extremely unnerving at the same time, while the moaning in between these hypnotizing sounds is fright-inducing. I'm sitting here at night at my desk, listening to the Caves theme and almost wetting myself. What a great soundtrack. The outro does not contain a lot of noteworthy elements. It does the job well of reducing the intensity of the piece gradually, until it fades out into nothingness. As I said, a great soundtrack. Okay, I'll be honest here. I haven't reached hell in my playthrough as of writing this part of the script. I went into this game completely blind, and not knowing how to properly fight or build my character has faced me with a brick wall in level 12. The succubi are really something else, aren't they? I've done a little research and gone back to learn a few spells for my warrior character to overcome these obstacles. It could have saved me a lot of time in hindsight, but it would have made the experience less raw, so I hope I made the right decision there. The Hell theme opens with a static noise along with a few timpani hits. Immediately this tells me that something is off, that the real danger is yet to present itself. At the same time, it's not as nerve-wracking as some of the other tunes, but rather feels eerily familiar. You've dwelled so deep that, in a way, you've aligned yourself with all the terror and darkness. This continues until everything disappears and the snare drums start to roll. While the background features screaming that definitely sounds like an abandoned infant, a wind instrument plays a typically cheerful melody. This combination does sound off, but in a good way. It could be meant to portray the utter insanity of the place you found yourself in, while it could also be symbolical for your character finally losing the last frayed ends of their sanity. The final section of the Hell theme is mostly an amalgamation of layered sounds, void of any rhythmical guidance. This track is overall very subtle, and while one could argue that the last few layers of Hell leading up to the final encounter could benefit from a bit more excitement, I think this approach still works wonderfully. The aesthetic of the last layers is already very dark and silently brutal. There is no necessity for a dense soundtrack to distract you from that. Good stuff. So, the original Diablo soundtrack ends with the Hell theme. However, there is a rather infamous DLC for Diablo 1 called Hellfire. To summarize things briefly, the company owning Blizzard at the time wanted an expansion, while the developers of Diablo didn't. To please the higher-ups, they had to outsource the add-on to a different team in the company, who sadly ended up ignoring a lot of requests and ideas from the original team. Allegedly. The result is an expansion that was meant to be a quick cash grab from the get-go, which ignores a lot of the thematic elements of the game it's supposed to add on to. The two new soundtracks, however, are also composed by Matt Ullman, so I didn't want to skip out on them. Here's a quick rundown. Say what you will about the gameplay additions, but the Hive theme is very well done in my opinion. It has a similar approach to the original tracks, thus not sounding out of place while bringing something new to the table. The Hive is a location very reminiscent of sci-fi alien movies, with a lot of slimy creatures and eggs placed all over the dungeon. The theme for this location has a distinctly unfamiliar feeling. This is mostly due to the percussion and drumming, as well as some of the additional sounds at the start of the piece. Overall, it's not extremely engaging to listen to, especially after the first minute or two, but I suppose it does its job well, since it makes me wonder where I am, what exactly I'm looking at or even fighting against when I listen to this. A decent track. The Crypts theme is quite different. The bells at the beginning create a more mystical vibe that I associate more with the original Diablo tracks. The soundtrack reeks of danger, which is very fitting for the visuals of the stage. However, as a whole, the piece doesn't really do much for me. It simply lacks character, which most, if not all of the original pieces have an abundance of. It reminds me a bit of the Caves theme, however not enough to mirror its subtle horror qualities. Decent, but not very memorable. While the soundtrack of Diablo 1 holds a rich variety of sounds, the instrumentation is carefully chosen, always complementing the in-game environments and atmosphere of the respective location. As a guitarist, I like how my instrument is integrated here. Not just because there's a lot of guitar, but more so because of the way how it is utilized. We have acoustic and electric guitars with a wide array of sounds, effortlessly blending into the overall sound idea, never taking too much space away from the other instruments. I also enjoy the drumming, which mostly resembles orchestral drumming instead of the typical popular music drum kit. This fits really nicely with the overall vibe of the game, as the marching band-like drumming creates an image of a gigantic undead army in my mind. You know, what I mentioned in the first track. The thought of battling this colossal force all by yourself is truly thrilling. The use of laughter, crying, etc. is integrated insanely well and makes the soundtrack much more atmospheric. The physical descent of the character is paralleled in the psychological descent towards insanity, feeling like the dungeons will forcefully make you surrender to madness any moment. With all of these remarkable elements combined, I'd say that Diablo's soundtrack does not only do the highly immersive game justice, but elevates its best qualities to even greater heights. What a beautiful set of compositions, definitely worth listening to even without the gameplay experience, and certainly good music. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more music reviews. As I mentioned previously, I will make a separate video about my experience playing Diablo 1 for the very first time, which should come out pretty soon. Be sure to stay tuned for that one if you're a fan of this game. If you have suggestions for other games with amazing soundtracks, please write them down in the comments. I read every single one of them. Thanks for watching, I'll see you soon. Take care.